You know, for a second there, when the alleged ESPN era started, and it was Zion Williamson and the Duke Blue Devils against the Virginia Cavaliers, I was like, I don't know if this is going to get off to the most auspicious beginning, but you know what? In the end, it actually really did. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. This is the UFC Brooklyn post-fight show right here on MMAfighting.com. I'm joined by Danny Segura, Chuck Mindenhall. Boys, the show is now over. Let's start. Before we talk about the ESPN experience generally, which we will get to, because I think I saw some good, I saw some bad. We'll get to that down the road. Let's start with that main event. TJ Dillashaw losing in 34 seconds to now defending champion at flyweight, Henry Cejudo. Chuck, was it the weight cut? Is Henry underrated? When you try to examine this loss for TJ and this great win for Cejudo, what stands out to you as the most important considerations?
I think Cejudo, first and foremost, just his speed and how quickly at him and his aggression early. I didn't really anticipate any of that happening. I didn't discount his chances of winning the fight, but I was surprised at how he went at him, and it just the blood in the water theory, like when he smells blood in the water and how quickly he pounced on that, that stood out to me. I mean, I was just sitting there like, whoa. Like, this is we saw what Cejudo did against Demetrius, but to see him do that against TJ Dillashaw, and regardless if you thought it was an early stoppage or not, that's what stands out. I'm just like, that guy was on another level tonight.
What about before the stoppage? What about the weight cut? How much do you think that played a role? Was that a reason why TJ's chin allegedly didn't hold up?
I don't think so, because we've seen him get wobbled early in the first by Cody Garbrandt at 135, his natural weight class. So I think maybe the weight cut could have had a small issue, but I don't think it was the complete recipe. I think Cejudo had a lot to do with that as well. And man, it's MMA. Weird things like this happen where you get like a really, really great guy like TJ Dillashaw just get caught in no time. Kind of reminded me of the Amanda Nunes, Chris Cyborg. Kind of had the same feeling to it where it just goes from 0 to 16.
All of these champ fights are blowouts. They're all just absolute blowouts, which is kind of weird, I guess, in a way. Although this is the one where a guy went down a weight class. So what you want to make of that? So when you examine this, when you try to put this situation together, what stands out to you as the prevailing reason why Cejudo won?
Well, I mean, clearly he's a very good fighter, and we've yet to see his peak. I think this is a fighter that's still developing and that is still getting a lot better. And, man, for him to catch TJ Dillashaw, was moving very, very quick, and he was very elusive like his usual self. Super impressive. I mean, I think we talk about TJ Dillashaw possibly becoming one of the greatest before this. Man, I think Henry Cejudo has what it takes to become one of the greatest as well.
My read on this is, to your point about the weight cut, no one really knows. It's just hard to say. I do think it probably played a factor, but you take these shots on the soft part of the temple, things are going to happen. So that's one thing. I also think, to the other point that he raises, dude, Henry Cejudo is criminally underrated. He has made dramatic improvements. I asked him if he thought the turning point was the Hayes fight. He didn't seem to think it was, or it wasn't. He identified other factors. But you go watch that fight, and then the Pettis fight, and then the Demetrius Johnson fight, and then this fight. Dude, it's a different fighter. He is so talented. He is so good. Why doesn't he get the respect he deserves? Is this the burden that the flyweight champion always has to carry?
I don't know if it's quite that, but it's very similar to Amanda Nunes in that sense, because I think we pegged her below Ronda Rousey. There was Ronda Rousey and there's everybody else. She was a part of a gray mass below Ronda Rousey at a certain time. And I think we had Demetrius Johnson held up here, and Cejudo was the guy that we put in the gray mass below him. You just don't see these guys coming up when they're like that, and I think that it's very difficult to get the first impression out of your mind. He did lose the first fight, and he'd lost another one, to Benavidez. It was a split decision. We've seen him lose. So I think that, and just like we've seen Amanda Nunes lose, they're very, very similar in that sense. But I agree with you 100%. This is a guy who I think we're like, well, we know he can wrestle. We know he can do that. But when he's letting his hands go and you see his speed and some of his movement, you realize how far he's come. And his last two fights, but this was special, man, because this showed that he wasn't. It was like the magnification too. I think a lot of people thought he would lose this fight. To be able to embrace the moment and to show nothing like intimidation in that situation, to go right at him like that, that's impressive stuff, to use the spotlight like that.
Now let's defend what TJ Dillashaw had to say, at least for a second, at least for an exercise here. Was the fight stopped early?
I think you could have let the fight go on a little more just to eliminate, all the doubt, but nonetheless, the fact is that TJ was rocked. He was wobbly. He was stumbling on the canvas. And then you had a very fresh Cejudo going in for the kill, which I think you put that scenario, 9 times out of 10, Cejudo finishes the fight if you let the fight go on, because TJ looked pretty hurt. But TJ does have a little bit of a case, but I still think it was a right stoppage. I don't think it was too early.
What about you? Good stoppage, bad stoppage? It's not great.
Yeah. You always want to kind of err to the side of caution. This is the way the sport should be built, right? But at the same time, when you have two guys at this level, it's hard because there's a human decision. You have a referee in there who wants to do the right thing, but at the same time, you're like, gosh, you do kind of want to see it be a little more definitive. So I would say it was a shade. I could see TJ's point about it being robbed from him to an extent. If you're thinking about it from his perspective, you're like, of course that was it. If he was still completely cognizant of what was going on and didn't, felt like he was going for that single leg and all that, you can understand that. But I saw it the way you did. I saw him get rocked, and it looked like, he goes falling backwards, and it just looks like he's on skates. And at that point, the referee's job is to protect the fighter at that point. So
my attitude is not egregious, but not great. I think it's somewhere where I'm at. Now, let me ask you, I'll go back to you, Chuck, one more time on this one. Should they do a rematch at 135? And everyone's like, oh, that's the only thing that makes sense. And on some level, I get it, because it's like, dude, that was a terrible loss for Dillashaw. The guy in the weight class below beat the guy in the weight class above in 34 seconds. Maybe bump him up to, rectify this. On the other hand, it's like, why? Like, what is the overarching reason that has to be next? Because we feel like a guy is owed a mulligan on this one?
Yes and no. I mean, if they're going to kill the division, you're like, well, then go up and do that. Right? It's the tidiest way to handle this. If you're going to give him the mulligan, you want it to happen where it's still vital, I guess, and where it would matter, because T.J. Dillashaw has that belt. And if you're going to play it back, I guess that would be where to do it. But it really depends on what they want to do with this division. If they're going to keep flyweight, obviously their kingpin now is very established. It's maybe more so than Demetrius Johnson, in the sense that I think that people want to get behind Cejudo. So it really depends. I think that's what it all comes down to. If they're going to keep flyweight, why not do it at flyweight? I don't know why at that point bantamweight would be a bigger deal.
Danny, what do you think about that? What should they do with flyweight? It seems to me like, I don't know if Henry Cejudo is more marketable than DJ, but at least I think it's definitely worth considering, given how things turned out tonight. And who knows if Dana White is telling us the truth about the numbers, but it seems plausible, right? What should they do with that division? And what do you think's next?
Keep it. I think tonight just proved the two flyweight fights that we saw, Joseph Benavidez versus Dustin Ortiz, and then Henry Cejudo versus TJ Dillashaw. They were both really exciting fights. Flyweight is an exciting division. And on top of that, you look at the characters that are now in that division and the storylines. It's pretty interesting. I think you should keep it. And also, I don't know about you guys, but I enjoyed the hell out of this fight week. I think this rivalry between Cejudo and Dillashaw is very fun, and in order to get the most out of a rivalry, you got to let it brew. You can't just go immediate rematch after immediate rematch. So let Joseph Benavidez, who has something to, has some ties with Cejudo, get his shot. I think he deserves it, and let Dillashaw go back to 135, and I'm sure Cejudo and Dillashaw will meet again at some point.
These immediate rematches, now the normal ones, the Garbrandt back-to-back, or the Namajunas and Jacek back-to-back, it didn't work out for the challenger. This would be different because you'd be going back to the natural weight class. If I'm TJ Dillashaw, it's actually the last fight I want next. I want to defend my title at bantamweight against another natural bantamweight. If I win that down the road, that's the way I would go. Any final thoughts on this one? Do you think TJ Dillashaw's stock was, look, it was not a good night for him, but was it a disastrous night for him? Where do you think things are for him heading forward?
Well, he did a very good job of convincing people, I think, that it was an early stoppage. I think he did a good job of doing that to plant a seed that probably there was an injustice in play. I honestly believe when it shakes out a little bit, it won't seem as crazy. When it was in real time and you're watching him get beat and, the referees are jumping in, you're thinking, oh, this is a huge blow to TJ Dillashaw. But as it's already kind of abating. And honestly, man, it's not the best case scenario for a guy who's 135 to lose at 125 and then go back to defend his belt, which is supposedly the harder weight class. But I know he can do it. And the greatest thing, we talked about this before, he has a really good attitude in the sense that I think he knows who he is and he's not afraid to speak his mind now. I feel like he'll handle himself well. And they have so many nice little rivalries up there at bantamweight. They'll find something that'll make sense for him.
I have to say, I like the belt up close. In pictures, it still looks a little weird, but when he had it up here on the desk, I didn't mind it. Actually, that was okay. Let's talk about the co-main event. Speaking of no belt in sight, Jesus. First of all, that fight sucked. It was not a good fight. It was not a high-level fight under any circumstance. Greg Hardy losing his UFC debut with an illegal knee via disqualification, and everyone's going to read into it. It's like, oh, the guy who puts his hands on women and breaks laws, of course he's going to break the laws of the octagon. I don't want to read into, like, real-life narratives bleeding into the octagon. On the other hand, it's like, oh, my God, Greg Hardy, of all the ways to lose, this was the way you stumbled into? What happened?
MMA, bro. MMA. I mean, these things happen in MMA, and it's funny because when he was tying up with Allen and Allen was on his knees, I saw it coming. Like 10 seconds before that, I'm like, he's going to throw a knee. He's going to throw a knee, and there goes the knee. And, of course, the fight had to end that way. It's just MMA is a bizarre sport, and this is just, welcome, Greg Hardy. Welcome to the sport of MMA. Yeah, this one was a weird one. I mean, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what you do with Greg Hardy. I guess you give him another fight.
Let me ask you this. Dana White was like, oh, this guy can fight. And I'm not saying that he can't. That's not what I'm saying. But I didn't watch that fight, Danny, and think to myself, geez, tremendous upside. I said to myself, he needs a lot of work.
Of course. I mean, this guy is 3-0. So not too many fighters that are 3-0 find themselves in the UFC in the co-main event of a card of this magnitude. So, of course, he's being pushed down the fast track, and we know it's because of his name. It's not because of his skill set. Of course, he has athletic abilities that can fill in those gaps, but for sure, this is a fighter that needs a lot of work. But you know what? Watching Greg Hardy sitting back there at the press conference, he's in this 100%. Like, he was extremely upset, and you can tell this bothered him a lot. And, just knowing his athletic abilities and his demeanor up there, I'm sure he'll make some improvements.
What did you make of his performance?
Well, I think that what it basically did is kind of expose the thing that maybe we downplayed to an extent, was just the relative inexperience of these guys in their fighting in a co-main event on such a big card with so much spotlight. Because honestly, now Hardy was saying that he saw him getting up, that he was in the process, and he tried to basically time that out. Maybe that's what he saw, but I was with you on that. It was almost playing out in slow motion for me when I was watching it. You're like, oh no, you're not going to do it. Boom! He hits him with it, and you're like, okay, this is like this I don't know what you'd call the justified end to something like this, because it was such a gamble on so many levels, and this guy just didn't have. He had like 2 minutes of experience in the octagon so far.
And here's the thing: it's like I'm not comparing the two in terms of fighting ability. But you put an inexperienced guy like CM Punk in a main role, you get a disaster. You put an inexperienced guy who's got a much more athletic upside, but still very green in this role, and what happens? You get calamitous results. It just sort of shows you, if you're going to spotlight people at this level, the due diligence has got. Even Sage had a nice early run, but he ran into a bunch of problems. Dude, experience at this level is so utterly critical. So where do you think they go next? Do you put them on Contender Series? But do you let them go shop around at regional shows while keeping them under UFC contract? What do you do?
No, I think they're going to keep him around. He's going to be in some sort of in a UFC card. He looked pretty healthy up there. I mean, he was kind of limping a little bit, but I don't think it's anything major. I think you just put him right back in a card, but definitely don't give him a main event or co-main event. Just put him down in the prelims and see what he can do, and give him a guy. I mean, it's so difficult to find a guy that's in his level, but see what he can do and put him in the prelims. But for something we know for sure, he shouldn't be headlining events.
And what about Alan Crowder? People were chanting a-hole, not at him, at Greg Hardy, but they definitely cheered him. Yeah. They seem to like him, but you have to wonder how transactional it was. Like, did they like him because of the role he served in this particular bout? So he's 1-1 in the octagon. I'm guessing he comes back. Any other ways in which he can leverage this for additional gain?
One thing I've realized is that Mike Jackson is still doing journalism from the last time I checked. He's not really in the octagon, fighting. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, he beat CM Punk. I don't know what it did. It kind of made people know who he is. I thought that he handled himself really well, honestly, this whole week. And let's put it this way. I thought Hardy was not respecting his punching power at all. He went right after him. He wasn't really covering up. He was just trying to knock him out. It was almost like Crowder just basically was weather the storm and then start to grind and then to, start getting off on his own offense at some point. And he pulled that off. I was pretty impressed by him, honestly, his poise in there. So I'll be paying attention. I don't know how he'll translate to the larger world out there, but I'll be paying attention to his next fight for sure.
It's amazing. You watch the Joseph Benavidez fight. We don't really have time to get to it, but this marvel of MMA grappling, that's the division on the chopping block. And then you watch the heavyweight fight, you're like, oh, my God, this is such bad MMA. But, okay, moving on. Paige VanZant gets a nice redemptive win against poor Rachel Ostovich, who came back here, could barely speak to the media for fear of bursting into tears. It was actually hard to watch. We didn't keep her here very long. I appreciate her coming back and at least trying to face questions about her circumstances, Danny. But she did good early, or excuse me, she did well early. In the end, though, it was kind of a classic Paige performance, right? Just these aggressive attacks all the time until you find the opening, and then she got it. What did you make from Paige's return to the W column?
She looked good. I mean, at this weight class, you can tell she packed a little bit more muscle. She looked a little bigger, and I think
and still fast.
And still fast. Yeah, she kept her speed for sure. And something I mentioned in our preview show, I think I said I thought we were gonna see a scrappy Paige that was also gonna mix in some technical aspects, and her maturation, we're seeing it. We're seeing it. She's 24 years old. She started in the UFC at a very young age, and here we have a fighter that's still developing, but she still has her scrappiness. But man, she's really picking up a lot of technical abilities, and that's what you want from a young prospect.
I don't want to undersell it. I don't want to oversell it. Let's be real. Ostovich came under the worst circumstances imaginable, and she is a less than 500 fighter at this point. But again, a win is a win in that octagon, even if for no other reason than it just mentally recharges you. These guys were talking about, who was it, Bermudez, coming back here being like, when you win, you get 1,000 texts, and when you lose, your phone never buzzes. So just to get back in that win column, I'm sure it was great for her. Anything else from the Paige experience for this week and then tonight that you think is important moving forward?
I feel like there's a little bit of a gear with her. She's one of those people I think has to feel like she's in a fight. Like, there was almost a narrative that was forming. She was getting taken down in that first round a little bit, and it looked like she didn't have answers for it immediately. And you're a little bit like, ooh, we may have had this pegged wrong. Like, this might be, if Ostovich is able to keep doing that, basically, this could be a very one-sided fight. But then you see her start to win the weird little scrambles. Every time they're off balance, she's ending up on top. You'd see this slow turn. I just think that she's one of those people who kind of warms up in a fight. We've seen that, and she gets. Obviously, she's aggressive the whole way, but I thought it was a really good performance because it showed her perseverance. And you were pointing this out in the week. I think she did want it. I know we were talking about this. You mentioned that you really believed that she wanted it. I thought that really came through.
What about Rachel Ostovich, man? She had her mother, her father, and her brother in her corner. Again, I thought she won the first round. I thought she was doing quite well in the second, to be honest with you. It wasn't like she got smashed to pieces. It's just in the end, it didn't go her way. But at the same time, all the baggage she carried in here, I was thinking, was the UFC right to let her even come into this fight with this circumstance? But then how do you say no to somebody who wants that so badly for their own, to your point, therapeutic reason? So Rachel Ostovich, I would like to see her get at least one more chance in the octagon. I think the UFC kind of owes it to her at this point. But at the same time, boy, it's out of the frying pan into the fire because you're now 4-5. You're still dealing with all these circumstances. How do you think things are going to go?
Well, first of all, I think she should take some time off. This was a very hectic process, dealing, because her whole private life got exposed to the public. And then you add on top the Greg Hardy situation, him being on the card just made matters worse. So I think she should take some time off. But like you said, she looked good. She looked game in that fight. And Paige VanZant is a fighter that's been in the UFC for already, 4 years or something like that. So we know that she's a legit UFC caliber fighter. So, yeah, I'd like to see her get another crack, another opportunity in the UFC. Hopefully, later down this year, once she gets everything sorted out in her personal life, because as you said, she came in here with some of the a pretty tough, rough circumstance. But yeah, I'd like to see her get another shot in the UFC.
And I know she leaves Brooklyn with a heavy heart, but she still has a lot to keep her chin up about, and I hope that she will. Also on the card, old man Donald Cerrone up there like Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino, just looking at the kids telling them to get the F off the lawn, and boy, they did. What a win. This was honestly, man, one of my favorite Donald Cerrone wins, and I really like Alexander Hernandez. I had him on my show right after he knocked out Beneil Dariush, and immediately I could tell this kid had personality for days. But I got to tell you, man, that win by Donald Cerrone was vintage Cerrone, picking it apart, landing the head kicks, dropping him. I don't even know what to ask except to say, A, do you feel like this was Cerrone almost, not in peak form, but pretty close? And it would just, the crowd seemed to love everything that was happening here. What did this win do for Donald Cerrone?
Well, it might have got him a fight with Conor McGregor. I think that's probably the biggest prize you can get, maybe bigger than any kind of title fight at this point. I think he sold that really well, and I think he kind of I honestly think he probably solidified it, when you really look at it, because who's Conor going to fight? Who's Conor going to fight? I think that fight makes a lot of sense. But just going to that, it's funny with him because you can't peg anymore Donald Cerrone. I feel like he's become unpredictable. It is never surprising when he puts on this kind of performance because he has it in him. He's all of a sudden he's a dad. He's kissing his baby on the way in. He just changes. We've seen that now twice in both his last fights.
No Greg Jackson this time.
No Greg Jackson. I mean, to me, man, the guy, if he comes in ready, like if he has the right mindset, I feel like he does this to almost anybody. But it's always fun when you see a veteran like that turn it on in a way that maybe the kid coming up thinks he doesn't have it anymore, and you see that because it reminds you just that these guys do have depths, that they have these depths that they can tap into, and they can get that rolling again. So it was cool to see.
Turns out old day drinking Don has a bit of some game left in him. Were you amazed at how clinical the performance was? Alexander Hernandez is not to be trifled with. 25 years old, feels like he's invincible. Dude, he got tuned up.
Yeah. This was an amazing performance by Donald Cerrone because the thing with him was like, he does only well when he's buddy-buddy with his opponents. When somebody gets in his face, tends not to do well. Well, Alex Hernandez got straight to his face and called him out, and he was on his face the whole time. And it was an interesting dynamic between them the whole fight week. So once it came down to it, Donald Cerrone lived up to the moment and, put on an amazing performance. And it almost feels like he's in his last run. It almost feels like everything he has to do now, it has to be perfect or else these chances are not going to come around again. So taking a fight with Alex Hernandez was a very big gamble. And, he took the gamble, and now he looks like he might have a fight with Conor McGregor. Just Dana White back there was saying he was interested in that fight. If Conor's in, Cowboy's in, why not?
Here's the thing. Hernandez not only pitched himself as the enemy of Cerrone. First of all, he made a fight that was not a grudge match, which was kind of interesting. But he also positioned himself against the crowd. Nevertheless, I even asked Cerrone, like, what do you think is next for Hernandez? And then I go back to you one more time. He's like, the kid's obviously going to be unbelievable. He's going to be doing great things. So they're making us wrap up. Let's do it very quickly. So, nevertheless, I still think he's got a bright future. Look, he made a gamble. It didn't go his way. Who cares?
Yeah. The dude's 25. His third fight in the UFC, he's fighting Donald Cerrone, a former UFC title challenger. I mean, the sky's the limit still for him. I mean, at 25 and fighting Donald Cerrone and losing, and he did pretty good that first round. He caught Cerrone with a few good punches. Let him develop, give him some more favorable matchups. Don't throw him against tough vets like that. And, I think he has a pretty bright future.
Anything you want to add about that?
No, he'll definitely bounce back. I mean, the kid, you've talked to him. I think he's got that kind of confidence. I still believe
he's a psycho.
Yeah, and he has that invincibility. I know he has that. So he's definitely going to bounce back.
All right, very quickly because they're kicking us out here. Any other strong performers? Chuck Mindenhall. There was a bunch on this card you'd like to shout out. Anything else?
I'm going to go with Glover Teixeira, man. I mean, when you get tuned up like he was early in that fight and just turn it around, I was sitting there in a little bit of wow, and I was even saying then, I was like, you're going to have to kill a guy like Glover Teixeira because he will come back. So that stood out for me.
Danny, any strong performers?
Man, I'm going to go with Gregory Gillespie. I mean, he picked up another win, and it just seems like he's just racking up wins, and he's getting more and more momentum. And the interesting thing is that he's not calling anybody out, so it kind of leaves him in an interesting position because you don't know where he's going to go. But, man, if you just keep getting wins in the UFC, like that's going to get you somewhere, especially over somebody like Yancy Medeiros. So, big win for him.
Yeah, I'll shout out Jeff Neal. Had a great win against Bilal Muhammad, looking super accurate with his boxing. Really appreciate that. Last thing on this before we had to go, the ESPN era. It was amazing. The first fight in JDS versus Kane and Fox ended in 1 minute and 4 seconds. This one, 34 seconds. If they had done this event like they had done the first Fox event, it would have been another disaster. What I liked about this ESPN event was that they learned from all those mistakes. I actually thought tonight's event, look, I heard people had problems with their ESPN streaming service. I did not, but I gathered that some people did. In the end, I kind of thought that like the first event on ESPN, to me, was a big hit. It was a big win. The main event was short, but everything else, there was a lot to like on this card. Your early impressions of how it was handled this time around?
I agree with everything you said. I thought that from what I've seen back here, watching a couple of fights, the production seemed great. Inside the ring, there was ESPN activities all going outside. It was fun to see like the first thing kind of feel like a big event, even though this card was weighed in different ways. Some people thought it was a big event. A lot of people thought it was okay, but it felt like a big event in the end. And I think that it seems like a good partnership. Seems like everybody's on board. So
Anything good or bad from what you saw, how ESPN embraced UFC, in particular for tonight?
I think overall it was a success. I mean, if you look at the card, the fighters delivered, and you got a little bit of everything. You got submissions, you got knockouts, you got pretty exciting fights, short fights, long fights, right? And everything just looked great. And it was kind of funny seeing like Stephen A. Smith on the broadcast and just all.
Funny is an interesting word.
It was like all these like ESPN elements that kind of just made it seem like, okay, they're part of the sports culture. Like, it's no fringe anymore. Like, you're part of the fam now. So, yeah, it was pretty interesting to watch.
I love the arguments for Stephen A. Smith. It's like he's manifestly unqualified to talk about MMA. Let's just call that what it is. So,
Cejudo, right?
so the idea is that you bring him on because he's a big personality and provides audience continuity. In other words, we have to trick the audience into liking something they otherwise wouldn't. But for the fact that Stephen A. Smith is here, it's like that's not a strong argument. Okay, neither here nor there. I do think the fact that the Duke game and the UVA game could have been calamitous for their first run on ESPN, but it wasn't, so that was interesting. Also, last thing I'll say about this, they just kind of like took the Fox logo off stuff and put ESPN on top and didn't change a whole lot of production elements. And I know it's the same UFC producing it. I did think there'd be a little bit more change. How about this? What about Trevor Whitman on the commentary side? Really love that.
yeah, I did too. I didn't get a chance to really hear the whole thing. I'll go back and watch that. But the couple of fights I watched in the back here, he's perfect for a role just like that.
Yeah, just quickly to that, like, MMA is a difficult sport to understand, right? So the more you make it easier to digest for the fans, the better. And I think Trevor Whitman did exactly just that because he was breaking down what the corners were saying. Oh, this is what they mean, and this is what he should try to do. He's following his corner's advice. He's not. So yeah, I thought that was a nice little wrinkle that they added that just helped this whole product a lot more easy, like a lot easier to consume.
All right, well, there are many more of these to come. This is the first one in a 5-year deal, so buckle up, kids. A lot more of Stephen A. Smith, of course, and MMA fighting headed your way. We're done here in Brooklyn. We appreciate you guys tuning in. They're going to tear down everything around us, and we got to get out of here. Thank you so much for watching. For Chuck and for Danny, we appreciate you guys tuning in for all of our coverage all week, courtesy of this man and the young lady behind the camera. We really appreciate what they did. Stay tuned for the MMA Hour on Monday, the live chat on Wednesday, the MMA Beat on Thursday, and so much more. And until then, get some sleep, donks.